So we finally moved past the Sermon on the Mount, and we're going to talk some about Jesus's miracles. And so we are going to talk about a double miracle today, actually, and the story of a dead girl and a sick woman. And so I'm going to jump right in and start reading about the first miracle. We're going to read in Mark chapter 5, verses 21 through 34. When Jesus had again crossed over by boat to the other side of the lake, a large crowd gathered around him while he was by the lake. Then one of the synagogue leaders named Jairus came, and when he saw Jesus, he fell at his feet. He pleaded earnestly with him, "My little daughter is dying. Please come and put your hands on her so that she will be healed and live." So Jesus went with him. A large crowd followed and pressed around him, and a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years. She had suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors and had spent all she had, yet instead of getting better, she grew worse. When she heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in a crowd and touched his cloak, because she thought, "If I just touch his clothes, I will be healed." Immediately her bleeding stopped, and she felt in her body that she was freed from her suffering. At once Jesus realized that power had gone out from him. He turned around in the crowd and asked, "Who touched my clothes?" "You see the people crowding against you," his disciples answered, "and yet you ask, 'Who touched me?'" But Jesus kept looking around to see who had done it. Then the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell at his feet, trembling with fear, told him the whole truth. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering." Okay, so things start out. There's this request for help that comes out. There's this man named Jairus, and he asks for Jesus to come and heal his sick daughter who's dying. And so Jesus agrees to come with this man, and as he's coming with this man, um, he is he sees all this crowd comes up around him, and they all start they're jostling against him. This large crowd, as they're moving with him to come see what he's going to do with this man's daughter. And this is the synagogue leader's daughter, so it's a big figure in town. And so they're going to follow him and see what is Jesus going to do. Hey, Jesus is going to do one of those miracles we've been hearing about. Let's go see him. So these crowds are all following him, and the narrator kind of pauses the story at this point. And we're on our way to do a miracle, and then Mark kind of goes, "But hey, in the crowd, in this massive crowd of people, there was this woman." And this woman had been on her period for 12 years straight now. Typically, period lasts about a week, once a month, for women. And this had gone on for 12 years straight, endlessly, and it never ended. And she constantly was looking for something some way to fix it. Then Mark tells us that she had tried doctor after doctor, and it had only ever gotten worse, not better. And so there was nothing that she could seem to do to get it to actually get better for her. And so she's lost hope at this point. And you have to, for 12 years, this woman has had this condition. Now, for 12 years, this particular issue that she has would have left her ceremonially unclean. So Leviticus, let's jump back into Leviticus, read the law so we can kind of see what I'm talking about here. Leviticus chapter 15, verses 25 through 27. When a woman has a discharge of blood for many days at a time other than her monthly period, or has a discharge that continues beyond her period, she will be unclean as long as she has the discharge, just as in the days of her period. Any bed she lies on while her discharge continues will be unclean, as is her bed during her monthly period, and anything she sits on will be unclean, as during her period. Anyone who touches them will be unclean. They must wash their clothes and bathe with water, and they will be unclean till evening. So for 12 whole years, for some of you, that's your entire life. For 12 years, she could not go and worship God in the temple. Everything she touched and everyone who touched her would be made unclean, and they could not go to the temple. Or if they touched something that was made unclean by her, they could not go to the temple. And so this would have made her an outcast. You would not want to be hanging around someone who was so could keep you from worshiping God because of their unclean state, and so they would stay away from her, and so she's lived 12 years as an outcast, as an unclean person, unable to worship God, and so she hears about Jesus, and she's heard these stories about Jesus. Put yourself in her shoes. This woman who's lost hope, who's seen doctor after doctor, and nothing's happened. She's used up all of her money on doctors. She's an outcast. Nobody wants to be around her, and she's been abandoned, or she's not been abandoned, but she's been unable to go into the presence of her God. And she hears about Jesus, and she's like, this man's in town right now, and oh, here he is. He's going to go do a miracle, and there's so many people around, but she knows that this man can heal her. That this man, this is God. She's been separate from God, and yet she trusts in his power to the extent that she's like, I don't even need him to touch me. I don't even need him to take time out of his day to heal me. I know in my heart of hearts, this man, this the power that is in this man, I would be healed if I could just touch the hem of his garment. Just the very edge of his cloak, if I could just touch that, I would be healed. And the Greek tells us that she specifically touched what's called the wings or the hem of his garment, is what the Greek actually says here. And most likely, the wings are the tassel that was worn on his on the corners of Jewish garments. They're called tzitzits, and this is one right here. You see it in this graphic as well, hanging off of his garment there. And they were basically these ceremonial reminders that the Jewish males are supposed to have specifically on their garments. And let me read for you from Numbers where it talks about them. Speak to the Israelites and say to them, throughout the generations to come, you are to make tassels on the corners of your garments with a blue cord on each tassel. You will have these tassels to look at so that you will remember all the commands of the Lord, that you may obey them and not prostitute yourselves by chasing after the lusts of your own hearts and eyes. Then you will remember to obey all my commands and will be consecrated to your God. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt to be your God. I am the Lord your God. And these tassels, without going super deep into the symbolism of it, because it's very, as is typical with Jewish symbolic features. There's a lot of symbolism that's in it that other Jewish religious documents outside of the Bible talk a lot about. But the tassels themselves symbolize the commandments of God. And through the pattern and everything, the number of commandments of God directly is symbolized. And so her touching this tassel is actually a symbol of her not just having faith in the words of Jesus, or words of God, but the Word Himself, Jesus. She goes for the tassel, the thing that signifies the commandments of God, the Word of God, and that Jesus Himself is the Word of God. And so she is trusting in the power and reaching for this tassel is intentional. It's not just anywhere on His garment. She goes for the wings of His garment. And her faith leads to her healing. We're told that she instantly, the moment she touched him, she felt her condition cured. She was better. And she knew it. And in touching Jesus now, the thing you have to understand, though, is because she was unclean, she technically would have made Jesus ceremonially unclean. Because remember, anyone who touched her became ceremonially unclean. So she has reached out and she has made this rabbi ceremonially unclean. And so it's because of this that she's very afraid when somehow, out of all the crowd, he stops and is like, who touched me? Who was it? Instantly gut-wrenching feeling. She's just made this very important man unclean by touching her. And he's looking around. He knows that she touched him. He's looking for who that person is, and so she's afraid. Afraid at the wrath of God. Think about it. She's been separated from God for 12 years. And now she's worried that she's just ticked him off. And so he says, who touched me? And Who touched my clothes? And then we're told, then the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell at his feet, and trembling with fear told him the whole truth. But, and this is the beautiful part, so separated from God for 12 years, terrified, she's just ticked him off. What does Jesus do? But Jesus has compassion on her, and he shows her love. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering." Imagine, put yourself in her shoes. You are separated from God for 12 years. You're separated from your loved ones for 12 years. No one touches you. You can't go in the presence of God. And rather than finding yourself punished for being unclean in the presence of God, she finds that the presence of God purified her uncleanliness. The very presence of God purified her uncleanliness. And instead of punishment and continuing to be an outcast, what happens is she receives love and compassion. First time in 12 years. This man, God, did what no doctor could do and changed her life in that moment. This reminds me of the verse in James chapter 4, verse 8. It says, "Come near to God, and he will come near to you. Wash your hands, you sinners, and purify your hearts, you double-minded." And so she came near to God, and he cleansed her of her condition. And her faith is what healed her. Her trust that just simply touching the tassel, representing the commandments of God that is worn by God himself, would heal her. What a beautiful, beautiful miracle when you really break it down and put yourself in her shoes. It's incredible. But the passage goes on. So remember, Jesus is on his way to heal a girl, right? So middle of the story, this all has happened. Jesus stops in the middle of this crowd. He's like, who touched me? They have this interaction. And while this interaction is happening, it says, while Jesus was still speaking, some people came from the house of Jairus, the synagogue leader. "Your daughter is dead," they said. "Why bother the teacher anymore?" Overhearing what they said, Jesus told him, "Don't be afraid, just believe." He did not let anyone follow him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. When they came to the home of the synagogue leader, Jesus saw a commotion, with people crying and wailing loudly. He went in and said to them, "Why all the commotion and wailing? The child is not dead, but asleep." But they laughed at him. After he had put them all out, he took the child's father and mother and the disciples who were with him, and he went in where the child was. He took her by the hand and said to her, "Talitha cum," which means, "Little girl, I say to you, get up." Immediately the girl stood up and began to walk around. She was 12 years old. At this time they were completely astonished. He gave strict orders not to let anyone know about this and told them to give her something to eat. So as Jesus is healing this woman, she's in the middle of another miracle. This miracle is taking place, having this conversation, and these messengers come and say to Jairus, "Your daughter's dead. Stop bothering this man. Your daughter's dead. It's too late. You missed your chance." And first of all, I don't know if you've ever been told that someone you loved has passed away, but the gut-wrenching feeling that pours over you in that moment is horrible. And so to be told that this man's own daughter had died, like this man had come to Jesus in a panic and desperation, "God, please heal my daughter. Come heal this girl." And Jesus is on his way, and they're too late, is what you have to be thinking. And so what Jesus says is, Jesus looks at him and says, "Have faith and don't be worried." Jesus is unfazed by this news. And so put yourself in his shoes again. Okay, like he's rallying, doing everything he can to have faith in God, that this man, he came to this man for a reason. This man, what he just saw was incredible. And so to trust that this man is able to do what he says, and so has faith. And so he goes with this man, and Jesus sends all the crowd away. They won't let anybody come but a few disciples and this man. And nobody else believes in Jesus' ability to raise a girl from the dead, to the point that they all start laughing at him when he says, "No, she's not dead. She's just asleep." And so, so he's like, No, she's just asleep. She's not dead. And they all laugh at her, and he goes in with just the parents and his disciples. And at a single command from Jesus, Jesus demonstrates his authority over death, and he raises this girl from the dead. At a single command, little girl, get up. And she gets up. She stands right up. And instantly this girl is raised from the dead. And he's demonstrated his authority over death itself. Jairus' faith was not unmet. Jairus placed his faith in the right one who is able to conquer death and was foreshadowing Jesus' ability to conquer death. And so it's these two miracles that take place, and while it may not seem like it, the woman and the girl are symbolically connected. This passage is a parallel that's happening, and these two miracles, they parallel each other. And so let me break it down for you. So the woman's condition was that she had a period that would not end, and the girl that would not end for 12 years, and the girl was at the age of starting her period. In Jewish law, 12 was the point a girl was considered of age. Around the time that she would start her period, that was when she would become a woman. And so 12 is at that age. And the woman's, so you've got a woman who is, her condition is having a period, and you have a girl who is at the age of having a period. These two things are happening. Both women are called daughter. And both women are called daughter. They at some point in this story, both women are ceremonially unclean. The woman because her condition, and the girl because she's dead. If you were in the presence of a dead body, if you touched a dead body, you would be unclean. In the same way, everything that anyone who touched this woman would be unclean. The woman has had this condition for 12 years. The girl is 12 years old. There's a reason Mark tells us the age of this girl, and he's drawing this parallel between these two miracles that are taking place at the same time. And the purpose of this connection, all these little details are not a coincidence, they go together. The purpose of this connection is to show that faith in Jesus brings about purification and the reversal of the curse. That rather than that God is able to go into the presence of these unclean situations through his son Jesus, and Jesus brings about purification when it's coming as a result of faith. The woman has the faith in Jesus. Jairus has the faith that he comes on behalf of his daughter, and even with the worst news possible, Jairus has faith that Jesus is able to do what he says he is able to do. And so Jairus comes with Jesus, and his faith is rewarded. In both situations, the faith is rewarded, and what is unclean is made clean. The woman placed her faith in him, and Jairus placed his faith in him. And so we see that Jesus, the presence of Jesus, his deity, his power, they reverse the effects of the curse on the lives of those who place their faith in Jesus. And it's foreshadowing what Jesus is going to do on the cross. That when we place our faith in Jesus, in his death on the cross, what happens? We who are unclean with our sinful conditions are made clean. We are purified. And what happens on the cross? Jesus defeats death. Jesus defeats death, and he raises again. And in the process, he cleanses us of all of our unrighteousness. And so from these two miracles alone, from the story, from the way that Mark parallels the two stories together and shows you the same details that he's seeing the symbolism that takes place there, he's foreshadowing who Jesus is and what Jesus is going to do just from these two miracles alone. Jesus is here to cleanse us of our unrighteousness and purify us of our sins. And he's going to defeat death. He's going to reverse the curse. This man right here is the curse reverser. So there's a whole lot packed into the story. Both beautiful stories, and when you put yourselves in the shoes of the people who experience these miracles, but at the same time, and very impactful in the symbolism and the foreshadowing of who Jesus is, the one who will reverse the curse. So as always, I leave you with that as a final thought. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. You know how to get in contact with me. I'll see you next week.